All right, so this is part 2, where I revisit the same essay. And now instead of looking for the structural elements, I'm examining the rhetorical techniques, specifically the relationship to audience that the author seems to be cultivating. And of course, there's going to be a little bit of overlap. Rhetoric and writing are interwoven. But this, again, is to accompany. This is also just one way. I'm only going to go through the first part of it. All right, so rhetorically speaking, immediately, again, we're getting, the sense that we're in the middle of a larger sequence of study. The music, the somber sort of lighting, I guess you could say, the way the text comes into the screen, all of that is basically mirroring his assertion about the painting itself and the artist's relationship to it. Reverence. If you'll remember, talking about it in the previous one, the artist idolizes Socrates, etc., etc. This is setting a tone of this is a really important work and one to be taken seriously. And of course, the subject matter is very serious. If it were light and bouncy, that would be incongruous.
This is The Death of Socrates by Jacques-Louis David. Completed in 1787, it is an exemplar of the neoclassical period in France, which David virtually created and brought to the fore himself.
Now, this is a really difficult part of any essay, but especially one that exists in the context that a video essay does that's posted online or a podcast or that sort of thing. Because if it's academic, you can trust that your instructor is going to read it because they're assessing it. If you're putting something out there in the world, you don't have that luxury. So what the author here has to think about is, what is somebody going to feel like when they come into this if they know this painting very well? What is somebody going to feel like if they come into this and they've never heard of it? How do I keep both of those people's attention and let them know their time is not being wasted here? So he gives you enough that if you don't know what he's talking about, now you do. Here's when it was painted. Here's who painted it. Here's what it's about. He also, though, he doesn't go beyond that. He doesn't keep going. He doesn't talk about the type of paint. He doesn't talk about, right? He doesn't get into the minutia that people often get bogged down in academics. Similarly, though, he doesn't go too far with the background itself. Like if you don't know this painting, you still don't know it very well, but you have just enough information to keep going. If, however, you know this painting very well, you haven't gotten bored with, yeah, I know all this. You do know this part, but he adds little bits like that David basically invented this period in art. That's something that if I'm interested in art, and if I know art, I can agree with, right? And now that's cultivating that bit of ethos where I'm saying, yeah, definitely. Or I'm saying, it seems like a strong statement, but I'm still engaged. I want to see where he's going with this.
Before I say more, it's important to note just how striking this canvas is, not knowing anything about it. So much jumps out at me right away. The clarity of the scene, the fierce gesture of the man in the middle, the interplay of the chalice and the hand that reaches for it, the angles of the light and the men, the soft draping garments, the bare, flat stone wall. As the title suggests, the scene...
Okay, so he's accomplishing two things here. Again, if you don't know this painting, he is giving you the necessary information. But he's also cultivating his invented ethos because, again, assuming we don't know this author of the video essay, not the painting, he's telling us, I see this work. I see the lines, I see the light, I see the framing. He is moving through it to let us know, I understand art. I am taking this work seriously. You can trust that when I tell you this is a masterpiece, I have at least done my work, right? I have made my observations.
Depicts the death of Socrates, told famously by Plato in his dialogue on the soul, the Phaedo. Socrates had been convicted in Athenian court of failing to acknowledge the gods of the city and corrupting the city's youth, and sentenced to death by drinking hemlock. As Plato makes clear in another dialogue, the Crito, Socrates could have escaped into exile, but instead he chooses to die, taking the opportunity to teach his final lesson, that death is not to be feared by the philosopher, but...
Okay, so this part definitely suggests somebody who is less familiar with this work. It's necessary background. If I'm really familiar with this work, that part might have lost me a little bit. There's not enough there to get me actively engaged in a sort of dialogue with the work. It's giving me, this is based off of Plato's recounting of Socrates' death. Here's what Socrates was accused of. And then and all of that is less compelling if you know the painting. So that suggests the relationship to the audience. What assumptions is this author making? That you're interested, that you want to know, but you don't know this story backwards and forwards. You don't know this historically speaking, philosophically speaking, or artistically speaking, that you do need some background. It is worth taking the time to tell you why Socrates was executed. But before getting to, though, the most important part of that, which is the part he's just now getting into, which is that Socrates didn't have to die. Everybody knew the charges against him were bogus. They just said, there's all these different ways you can get out of it. You can escape. We'll fall asleep and you can escape. And he refuses, saying, my life would mean nothing if I was willing to say or do anything to get out of being in trouble.
Embraced as an apotheosis of the soul. David chooses to paint the moment just as Socrates is grabbing for the poisoned draught. He's been discussing at length the immortality of the soul and doesn't even seem to care that he's about to take the implement of his death in hand. On the contrary, Socrates is defiant, gesturing toward the afterlife to which he hastens. David idealizes him. Socrates would have been 70 at the time and somewhat less muscular and beautiful than painted here. The raking light coming in from the top left pours onto Socrates.
Okay, notice his word usage. Radiant, beautiful, light pouring on. Now, he's describing the work, but this is also a very specific word choice to create the atmosphere he wants. And again, what does this tell us about the relationship to the audience? That this is an audience who can appreciate art, but also an audience who will benefit from being walked through. So that's basically what I'm talking about here. We're not talking about, again, complex language. You don't need to be bringing in, high-level rhetorical terms or anything like that. It's just really looking at what tone has been set. What does he seem to believe his audience cares about, and what do they need to know? So that's the idea. You're doing that to complement the elements of the essay. All right, I look forward to seeing what you come up with.